4 years still war. Russia didn't collapse, Ukraine didn't surrender. But who is really winning, or who used to it? I discuss these issues with fellow journalists from different corners of the world. I'm Jarosław Włodarczyk. Welcome to Press Talks.
Beata Płomecka, Polish Radio Brussels correspondent, award-winning Polish radio journalist, Brussels correspondent on EU affairs since 2005. Julia Iershova, journalist, Slava TV, over 15 years of experience in media and public communications, former press secretary to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. Sanjay Kapoor, editor, Hard News magazine, senior commentator on Indian and global affairs, author of Bad Money, Bad Politics.
The war didn't stop the world. Alliances are recalculated. Here are the headlines shaping that story.
Four years of war in Europe. Zelensky pushes for Ukraine's 2027 EU accession as Europe marks 4 years of war as it happened. Russia eyes higher Urals oil exports to China amid Indian cutbacks, traders say. Will India warm to Russia's bid to revive Troika with China?
Good to see you all. Thank you for joining. And my first question to Julia, from Kyiv perspective, is world still standing with Ukraine, or is rather using to the status quo of war now?
Hello, thank you very much for having me here. So frankly speaking, it's like a mixed feeling, because from one hand we see that key European governments remain committed and the leadership level in European capitals remain pro-Ukrainian, and we still hear from our European allies such as Poland, such as France, Germany, Baltic, Scandinavian states that we will continue to support you as long as it needed. And actually it is true that military, political, economic support still continues. And some may say that there is a war fatigue among European societies, but I want to say that it is not true, because actually recently we saw the enormous support from the European societies when just Russia made its terroristic attacks on civilian infrastructure, on power electricity grid, and leaving Ukrainians, just ordinary Ukrainians, without electricity, without water, without heating, in such a severe temperatures which were this winter. And we saw that European societies just in very short terms raised millions of money, millions of euros, millions of zlotych, and hundreds of generators were just bought and delivered to Ukraine, which is actually significantly helped the humanitarian situation.
Yeah, you mentioned about sanctions which are working or not working, and this is my second question to Sanjay. How India is seeing this war, and particularly, is it strengthening the power and economy of India, or it's now distancing slightly from Russia?
Thank you for inviting me to speak here. It's a very important issue on which you are raising this question. To tell you frankly, much of my views would be colored with from where I come from, what I'm speaking, and also the history that is riding alongside whatever I'm saying. In terms of the oil that we've been buying from Russia, that started off immediately after the Ukraine war broke out in 2022. That's about 4 years ago. That is the reason why we are here. India has benefited quite a bit. In fact, we spent about $150 billion worth of money on oil, which has all gone to Russian coffers. And that has in a certain way helped them to beef up their fight against Ukraine. To tell you frankly, in India, there is no great love for anything that's happening in Europe. I mean, the only time people got to know about Ukraine was when many of our students were stuck in Ukraine and they had to be brought back to India. And so there was a big joke that used to go around that Prime Minister of India stopped the war in Ukraine to get the boys back, or the girls back for that matter. So if you ask me if there is anything happening in India about the Ukraine war, I would be sorry to say it's not happening. Primarily because we have our own concerns and India has become far more inward looking than what it was in the past.
And Beata, inside of the EU, how do you see Russia is treated now as a military problem or threat, or contrary, it's just a long-term disruptor of the of the European Union policy?
Well, I think both answers are correct. One follows from the other. Russia is a military threat, and in the long term, it will continue to destabilize the political situation in the European Union. Actually, this is happening as we speak now, constantly, through hybrid attacks, through the acts of sabotage. So this is it, one thing. And the second thing, is there a clear strategy toward Moscow? I would say there wasn't one for decades. That is certain. But now, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think the European Union drew some conclusions from its dependence on energy supplies from Russia, especially Western Europe, amazingly enough. But in Central Europe, Slovakia and Hungary are still dependent on Russian fossil fuels and they don't want to give it up. However, there are regulations in the European Union. That has changed recently. So we have regulations and the European Union will simply end supplies from Russia, from gas supplies from Russia from the autumn next year. We, of course, can say the mills of the European Union growing slowly, but this is the characteristics of the European Union. 27 countries, you have to keep in mind the interests of all member states, and it's really difficult to get unanimity as for sanctions, and also the qualified majority sometimes for some regulations. As for sanctions, I would not say that they don't work. They actually do work. Because otherwise Putin wouldn't ask for help in North Korea, China, or Iran.
Yeah, that's what I want to return to Sanjay and ask about China, because China and India are the biggest customers of, let's say, of Russia. Do you think that Russia is a junior partner now, or colony, becoming economy of China, or could be still the world power?
No, let's face it. I mean, the truth is that Russia depends entirely on China for many things, not just buying oil for that matter, but also for weapon systems, for many other things. And there is a country which is also very short on people. Just about 141 million people are there in Russia for that matter. So they not only need people, they need weapons, they need money, they need everything. And China is trying to beef up Russia to ensure that it doesn't sink. Without China's support, I think Russia would have sunk long time back. So that's the truth. That's happening there. But what about India? India is also there in a quiet way, trying to help Russia in doing many things. It has purchased a lot of stuff from them. They supply things that do not come in the arc of the so-called scrutiny of the West at the moment. So there is so much happening, but Russia, I would buy this argument, is entirely indebted to China.
But I want to return to you about the European Union aspirations. And do you think this is from European Union perspective, strategic planning, it's realistic, or it's just a symbolic support to Ukraine?
This is, of course, symbolic support for Ukraine, because in the European Union there are some voices that Ukraine should be rewarded for all its sacrifices, and the Ukrainians should see the European Union as their future, that there are places in Europe. But at the same time, it is really difficult to arrange the Ukrainians' membership in the EU. I mean, there are many different positions among member states, and also those who are now supporting Ukraine are not so willing for swift Ukrainian accession to the EU. Ukraine is a large country with a significant agricultural sector. What would that mean for the EU funds? What about the voting power? These are questions that are not answered for the time being, and they should be answered before Ukraine is taken to the European Union. There is no funding in the budget after 2027 for Ukraine. So these are very difficult questions for the European Union. No one dares to speak about the date of the accession. There were some rumors that maybe 2027, maybe partial membership for the time being, the common market, and then gradually Ukraine will get its rights. But for the time being, the European Union is waiting, but of course trying to offer something Ukraine. So maybe this point will be the start of the negotiations that are now blocked by Hungary. But still, the European Union will try to do somehow with this Hungarian veto.
And how does it look from Kyiv's perspective, Julia? Is it realistic, or these delays were just mentioned by Beata could potentially weaken the support of European path for Ukrainians?
So first of all, I would like to say that we understand that there is a discussion inside of the European Union, and we hear statements of, for example, the Commissioner of the Enlargement, Marta Kos. She said that the year of 2027 is possible, and simultaneously we hear the words of Friedrich Merz, who is saying that this date is not realistic. But I want to say that if the accession doesn't happen next year, the European morale will not weaken suddenly, because right now ordinary Ukrainians just focused on the issue how to stop the war and how just to return our people home. And I would like to say that still there is very important for us to hear that Ukraine is a part of the European family, and to hear the realistic date, not some when, but the real date.
Right, but beyond this weaponry, oil and geopolitics are people's stories. Let's see the headlines behind this cost of humans on the war.
Ukraine remembers its dead as war enters a fifth year. Nobody believed that Putin would invade Ukraine. 4 years on, has Europe learned from the failures of 2022? How 4 years of war in Ukraine have changed Russia? Ukraine, after 4 years of war, exhaustion on both sides is the main hope for peace.
Now we move a little bit, stop on the language. And Beata, is Europe still talking about war against Ukraine, about Putin as a war criminal, or it's slowly softening the message and the language?
I would say Europe is a very broad term. In like-minded countries, that is certainly the case. But Hungary, for example, says that this is the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and Viktor Orban would certainly not dare to call Putin a war criminal. But in many countries, also in our region for sure, and also in Western Europe, I mean, he's described in exactly these terms, and people are talking about the war. And what I notice also, this is really interesting. What I notice among the correspondents in Brussels, these from the Western Europe, I saw them, I tried to understand them for many years, and I think they didn't have that. Didn't pay attention what's happening on the eastern border of the European Union, and now they talk like the Polish correspondents. They talk like the Ukrainians. I mean, they see more and more. They open their eyes. So when I read, for example, their articles, this is straightforward that I didn't see it before. So many things has changed after since 2020, 22 after the Russians' invasion of Ukraine.
And in India and more generally in Asia, usually there are used expressions like Ukraine crisis or European conflict. And Sanjay, do you think this is kind of the escaping from responsibility to take any stronger actions?
You know, I don't think that there is a desire in our part of the world, which is like Asia, to intervene in something which is seen as a white people's war that's happening in Europe. They think there is a belief that it can be sorted out, or the fact is that Russia is taking on. Russia is not hated as much as is hated in Europe, for that matter. I know that what Mr. Putin has done is act of war criminal, but India, and for that matter, many Asian countries, that would not be perceived in this manner. And primarily because there is so much of history riding on that. I'm saying it again, but we are never really contemporaneous with our present. History moves in disguise, as many years ago Regis Debray said. So that is what is happening, because we believe that Mr. Putin may have done something wrong, but for that matter, what do you say about the United States of America? Why is it going for war in Iran, for that matter? What has Iran done? So there are questions, and there are very few answers that are coming to anybody at the moment.
So there are huge differences. And Julia, how these differences in language, in framing the problem, are affecting Ukrainian diplomacy efforts today?
So I want to say that other diplomats may call it whatever they want, but it doesn't actually change the reality, because it's not a conflict, it's just war, because conflict it's something local, but our war just goes long beyond the Ukraine. And I want to ask, is it just local when we see that when Ukraine cannot export its grain, it is actually that the global south feels the consequences? Or is it local when just Russian rockets and drones cross international borders of Poland, of Romania, and actually kills people and make some destructions? Or is it local when Russian drones disrupt the work of the civilian airports in European cities? Or probably is it local when just the GPS signal jammed in the Baltic Sea? Or probably if Russia ever turned its nuclear threats into action, and we would see that the nuclear cloud covers the main European agriculture countries, that these consequences will feel.
We are nearing to the end of the program, so last questions, very quick answers, please. First to Sanjay. If war will be frozen, stopped somehow, if India will treat it as a delayed responsibility of Russia, or just a business as usual?
I think it will be business as usual. I don't think Russia would be blamed by Indians. See, Indians have historically been very close to the Russians. You may like it or not, but the fact remains that it is. I think what will be perceived by many people is a failure of UN to stop wars. They could not stop wars in Gaza. They could not stop war in Ukraine. And these kind of things continue to happen, and there's nothing that anybody can do. And I don't think there would be too much blame that we sitting on the doorsteps of Russia, for that matter. So it'll be a frozen war. Everybody would be happy, but that's all.
Okay, thank you. And Julia, what does it mean for Ukrainian society, the end of war now, victory of war? What is the real meaning now, after 4 years of war?
Yeah, after 4 years of war, the meaning of victory is not just about stop fighting or just cease fire, because it means for us just first is strong security guarantees, because we need such the security guarantees that will give us a guarantee that Kremlin will not attack us in 10 or 20 years, and without real security, any ceasefire to our mind is just a pause. The second is reparations, because Russia must pay for the destructions, for the cities it ruined, and of course for lives it destroyed. And third, it's accountability, because there must be international trials, and war crimes cannot simply be forgotten, and justice matters for us. And something that is very emotional for us, it's the return of our people, because all prisoners of war just have to be returned. And of course, some of the very special thing for us is the returning of our children, because there are, I think, 20,000 of Ukrainian people that were taken to Russia and abducted. And another key element, of course, is the liberation of our occupied territories, because it is not just land for us, it's our homes, it's our families who are somewhere where we just can reach them now. It's a big pain in our heart. So, and I just want to add that Ukrainian society is very clear in this point, and we see latest polls that show that more than 60% of Ukrainian people just ready to continue fighting, and they are not ready to sell our territories and to give it just to Russia.
Yeah, and with weakening support from the US, Beata, do you think that Europe is ready to be to act as a real security guarantee or anchor for Ukraine?
On Ukraine, it is Europe, above all, that is supplying military equipment and providing financial support, and it will do so. The coalition of willing is mostly there are mostly the European member states, the European Union member states, plus, for example, UK. But more broadly, there are some voices that Europe must stand on its own, and the transatlantic ties must be broken. But I don't think it is realistic, and nobody, I think, in the European Union is thinking about that, because everyone knows that nuclear guarantees are only provided by the United States, for example. The European Union, the European politicians know that these are only Russians that will be happy if these transatlantic ties are broken. But for Ukraine, of course, Europe will do its utmost, because Europe knows that the United States will not help.
4 years of war, and Russia somehow adapted. Ukraine, as we've heard, is fighting not only for territory, but for memory, support, and for existence. And the question is, who will be still standing when the war will be over? That's all for Press Talks today. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, my fellow colleagues, for your insights. I'm Jarosław Włodarczyk. Stay well and see you next time. Goodbye.